Yeah,
chromosomes don't necessarily mean you're male or female.
Gender.
With gender
identity. Go ahead. No, so
especially, but even so, you have a thing like Klinefelter's syndrome. So you don't know what you're talking about. You're not educated on genetics.
Would you like to discuss the genetics? Or
well, no,
what
no.
are your genetics?
So I'd stay away from the genetics and back to the brain scans.
You cut that out now, or you'll go home in an ambulance.
Yeah, that seems mildly inappropriate for a political discussion. Absolute nonsense, Peter. My position on Israel was made clear in the 2013 column, and to call me equivalent with people who are murdering Jews is insanity. It's beyond insulting. And if there's anybody who's emboldening Hamas to kill more children, it is you, because it's your policies which have emboldened Hamas. They know that people like you are going to get on American television and talk about how the Palestinians are meek victims, and whenever they fire rockets, it can be justified by Israeli policy. Hamas celebrates every moment you're on television, Peter.
Black families have zero or negative wealth. White family worth, in terms of financial worth, is 69 times more than that of black families. Given this disparity, how can you argue that racism is not a driving factor in income inequality?
Because it has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. And when you have a culture that doesn't... You know what? Explain to me. You explain to me why black kids aren't graduating high school. Explain that one to me. Explain to me why black kids are shooting each other in rates significantly higher than whites are shooting each other. Explain to me why 13% of the population is responsible for 50% of the murder. Explain to me why the number of black kids in prison, not for innocent reasons, not for walking down the street and getting pulled into a prison, is so high. Explain, if it has nothing to do with culture, explain to me why the single motherhood rate in the black community jumped from 20% to 70% in the same course of time that the civil rights movement has made such tremendous strides. Is America more racist now than it was in 1960? And if it is, please explain to me how that happened.
Statistical disparity, and you determine that that is not a racial disparity, it's something else. Well, we can return to it. That's okay too. Ben, do you want to?
Yes, it's called evidence of racism. When there is no evidence of racism, it's probably not racism. When there is actual evidence of racism, it's probably racism. And the fact that everybody jumps from there's inequality and therefore there is inequity, just because there's inequality does not mean there was inequity.
But there has to be racism. You can't say there's no racism.
Without evidence?
No. I'm just saying that I don't know which animal. Maybe we're talking about dogs or something. I'm talking about human beings, and I'm like, human beings are most likely going to have racial prejudices. I'm just so sorry. I'm just so sorry. I don't know. I don't come from. I come from planet Earth.
Charles, I want to ask you a question. So your default is that when there is no evidence, racism is the deciding factor. That is
no, it's not saying that. I'm just saying that you're going to have sexists, you're going to have racists, you're going to have all this stuff. I'm just saying that...
I agree it exists, but the problem that I'm seeing, and this is the problem with the general conversation, is that there's no solution in simply saying there's racism out there. How does that solve anything? I mean, when you talk about there's institutional racism, what does that mean? Show me a law that is racist in intent, and we will agree. Show me a police officer who commits a racist act, like we saw in South Carolina, right, where a police officer shot a black man running away, and it was obviously unjustified, and I will agree. But you need... The idea that you can craft a narrative based on no racism because it just must be somewhere out there in the ether, that doesn't solve problems for anybody and creates more problems for people because now they grow up in a milieu and an environment where they are told that every obstacle they face is from some shadowy, nameless, faceless group who's out to get them simply because of the color of their skin. They'll never succeed in that environment. With the notion of white privilege, which has become this buzzword that you hear all the time now, white privilege is responsible for everything up to and including the Kardashians. It's responsible for everything, white privilege. White privilege is a way to silence anybody who is not of color. That's what white privilege is. It is just a leftist bullshit term that means shut up because you are not a member of a minority group, a privileged minority group in the leftist space. It's reverse racism of the highest order. You're basically saying to white people who aren't racist, and you can't find any proof of their racism, that they must be racist because they're white. That is called racism. If you are accusing somebody of something simply because of the color of their skin without any evidence, that's called racism, gang. To deal with white privilege. Because white privilege always assumes racism without evidence, always assumes racism without evidence, when there is no racism, they simply make up the evidence with regard to white privilege. So here at Mizzou, they just make up the evidence of white privilege. They can't find evidence of white privilege, so what they do is they just make it up. Right? They make up stories about how a poop swastika, which I'm Jewish, okay? Swastikas aren't aimed at black people. Okay, a poop swastika
in a bathroom somewhere, this is somehow evidence of a grand racist conspiracy led by Tim Wolf. Right? Okay. I wasn't aware that Tim Wolf scrawls poop swastikas in his spare time. Right? When it comes to stories like Jonathan Butler's story about how he was hit by the president's car, he was hit by Tim Wolf's car. If you watch the tape, he was not hit by Tim Wolf's car. There's a thing called video, gang. You should use it. Okay, he jumps in front of the car and steps into the car. Okay, he acts like your kid acts, or you used to act when you were a kid and you didn't want to get in trouble for hitting your sibling, so you took your sibling's hand and hit them in the face and said, "Stop hitting yourself." Okay, that's what Jonathan Butler did, and then he claimed that he was a victim of systemic racism thanks to this, and then went on a hunger strike, the answer to which should have been, okay, so starve.